Well, hey there, everyone. I tried to do a live poetry reading the other night on Facebook, and Facebook, as it has told me quite a lot lately, does not like me. Having deleted my account and now failing to post my deeply meaningful half hour of poetry reading, I figured F Facebook. And have you ever heard me do that? I would just use the word, but I'm trying to be responsible with my time. But to heck with Facebook, I figured I'd just kind of record it myself and then share it. Um, because there's a bookstore here in Fredericksburg, a used bookstore called Riverby Books, and I will duck in there every once in a while when I'm downtown, and I'll peruse the shelves a lot of the time of poetry, and I'll pick up a volume, and if something captures my heart or my mind, or something has a beautiful metaphor or something that's interesting and accessible, I'll sometimes pick the book up, and that's what I did this time with this copy of poetry by Pattiann Rogers. Pattiann Rogers I'd never heard of before. Um, but I decided I would share this with you again. I did this when I had the flu, and people seemed to like it. And God knows I love, adore reading poetry, and I get great pleasure out of it. And I figure if I'm getting pleasure out of something, and you're getting pleasure out of something, then we're pleasuring one another, and I live for that. so, um, so The first poem I'd like to share with you is Pattiann Rogers' The Question of Affection. We don't know yet what it means to be touched, to be the recipient of caresses, what the ear learns of itself when its lines are followed by the finger of somebody else. We know the spine of the infant can expand, the neck grows sturdy, the shoulder blades facile by fondling alone. The acuity of the eye is increased, the lung capacity doubled by random nuzzles to the ribs. But we don't understand what the mind perceives when the thigh's length is fixed by the dawdling of the lover's hand, when the girth of the waist is defined by the arms of a child. An affectionate ear on the belly must alter the conception of the earth pressing itself against the sky. An elbow bent across the chest must anticipate the early light angled over the lake. The curl of the pea can be understood as one hand caught carefully inside another. Cores and cylinders, warm boundaries and disappearing curves, what is it we realize when these interruptions of space are identified with love in the touch of somebody else? I must remember now what it was I recognized in the sky outside the window last night as I felt the line of my shoulder drawn in the trace of your lips. So, the thing I love about language and people speaking to one another, I say this in classes a lot, is that when I speak, I am touching you inside your ear through the sound waves that propagate through the air. I'm stimulating you inside your head. Speech is touch in that way. And I love the way that this speaks so much to touch and the difficulty we have explaining exactly what that touch does, right? We don't know yet what it means to be touched, to be the recipient of caresses, what the ear learns of itself when its lines are followed by the finger of somebody else. It's a beautiful opening because it talks about tenderness and contact and the almost undefinable thing that we feel when somebody either purposely or absentmindedly does that. Maybe that was the seed for this poem. I love the way poets do that. They take a single moment and they expand upon it. They imbue it, right, with greater surface area. so that there's more complexity and that a simple thing can hold so much more. And this simple idea, or the way it ends with a shoulder being traced by the lips of somebody else, is expanded upon to encompass the way that connection between two people can capture a memory, can capture a place. It's a beautiful poem, I thought. I'll come back to Pattiann Rogers when we return, sort of for the end of things. You know, I have a couple of others I'd like to share in the meantime. I picked up a copy of a Norton anthology of contemporary and modern poetry. Now, if you've ever been in college or taken a college English class, you have no doubt had to purchase at some point a Norton anthology. And you know, I all due credit to the brilliance of Keats and Milton and Yeats and Coleridge and all of the other people that are usually encased between usually a hard cover of a tome like that. But this 2 volume set for about $10, which I thought was a steal, has some really beautiful stuff in it. If you know me, you know that my affinity for poetry is usually around the way a poem can capture a moment, right? A touch of the ear. It's evocative, right, of a moment, almost nostalgia-like, but then it wraps that around a notion of humanity, a strength, a weakness, a characteristic of us, and sometimes more than that. So I'm going to read this first poem. Where is she? It's by Elizabeth Bishop. Elizabeth Bishop uh, grew up in Nova Scotia, and Elizabeth Bishop writes frequently about the maritime culture of that part of Nova Scotia. I was going to say she lived on the coast of Nova Scotia, but come on, most of Nova Scotia is a coast. So this is a poem called The Fish. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water, with my hook fast in the corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He didn't fight at all. He hung, a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. Shapes like full-blown roses, stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down. While his gills were bringing in, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly, I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 in a wire leader with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end from where he broke it. 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread still crimped from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like medals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared and stared, and victory filled up that little rented boat from the pool of bilge where oil had spread a rainbow around the rusted engine to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunwales, until everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And I let the fish go. Surprise. So catching a fish with a history of evading being caught, signed in the 5 hooks still in its jaw. I love the way this poem goes from the beginning of a fish hanging there. It didn't fight. It didn't fight at all. Almost feels like past tense. Is it dead? Is it just given up? And then we go into this vibrant description of, after these dull things, of the brown rose, brown wallpaper, right? And the stained and lost full-blown roses and barnacles. Suddenly we're into these colors, the blood. It's suddenly dangerous now, this fish that may be dead. Now it's got its dangerous, right? It's frightening gills that can cut so badly. And then we have white flesh and dramatic reds and blacks and pink swim bladder like a big peony. I love that line. And then his eyes, dull and silvered. Isinglass is mica, a mineral film that you would cut into sheets and use as windows because it's heat resistant, unlike kerosene lamps and on old carriages back in the 1800s, right? And then this notion that life is returning to it, the eyes shift, but it wasn't toward me, and this history, and then suddenly that drop of fuel on the bottom of the boat, spreading the diffraction, the many rainbowed colors of the oil on the surface, and all of it saying, no, this fish who's gotten away so often doesn't deserve to be gotten today. Gosh. And you could say it that way, but the way the poet has, you could say, I caught a fish. I didn't know if he was dead or not, but then I saw he had all these fishing hooks in his mouth. I thought, I can't, you know what? If he lived that long, I'm not going to be the one to take him out. But a poet gives us this. How delicious. How absolutely delicious. I'll give you another from this collection. This is May Swenson. And May Swenson is thought of as a little quirky, a little, uses typical poetic themes, but also, will give you the unexpected. Poets traffic, you use that word deliberately, poets traffic in human nature. And we are, if we take ourselves as human beings as a whole, we have all kinds of things in us, the sordid and the violent and the salacious. But this is called strawberrying. I'm going to let you sort of feel it out for yourself. Sorry about my body position. I'll try and turn a little more toward you. Strawberrying. I love this. My hands are murder red. Many a plump head drops on the heap in the basket, or, ripe to bursting, they might be hearts matching the blackbird's wing fleck. Gripped to a reed, he shrieks his coquerie in the next field. He's left his peck and some juicy cheeks, when at first blush and mostly white, they showed streaks of sweetness to the marauder. We're picking near the shore, the morning sunny, a slight wind moving rough-veined leaves our hands rumple amongst. Fingers find by feel the ready fruit in clusters. Here and there their squishy wounds. Flesh was perfect yesterday. June was for gorging. Sweet hearts young and firm before decay. Take only the biggest and not too ripe, a mother calls to her girl and boy, barefoot in the furrows. Don't step on any, don't change rows, don't eat too many. Mesmerized by the largesse, The children squat and pull and pick handfuls of rich scarlets, half for the baskets, half for avid mouths. Soon whole faces are stained. A crop this thick begs for plunder. Ripeness wants to be ravished, as udders of cows win hard, the blue-veined bags distended ache to be stripped. Hunkered in mud between the rows, sun burning the backs of our necks, we grope for and rip loose soft nippled heads. If they bleed, too soft. Let them stay. Let them rot in the heat. When, hidden away in a damp hollow under moldy leaves, I come upon a clump of heart shapes, once red, now spider spit gray, intact but empty, still attached to their dead stems. Families smothered as at Pompeii. I rise and stretch. I eat one more big, ripe, lopped head. Red-handed, I leave the field. Now, it's about berry picking, right? But it's evocative of so much more. I mean, think of it. It begins with a crime and ends with a crime, right? Right? My hands are murder red, and it ends with red-handed. I leave the field. So it starts with a murder, and it ends with a phrase you'd reserve for a criminal who's been caught in the act of theft, red-handed, right? The images at the beginning of murder, also beheading. Many a plump head drops on the heap in the basket is evocative of a guillotine. Heads fell into baskets, right? Or ripe to bursting, they might be hearts. So we go from murder and chopping off heads to the image of hearts to a heart shape. When you think of a blackbird, it says matching the blackbird's wing fleck. If you know of red-winged blackbirds, they have like a little half heart on the curve on the shoulder of each wing, and if you take those two halves and put them together, it's a whole heart. Left his peck in some juicy cheeks. Now look. This isn't about sex, but there is something very sexual about it. The imagery here, the idea that things are at the peak of their ripeness, and they are full, and they are straining at the seams, bursting with flavor. They are engorged, right? Ready fruit in clusters. It's abundant. We're rummaging around with our fingers to find by feel. Squishy wounds, young and firm before decay. So this is a field of strawberries in its prime, right? And come on, we rip loose soft nippled heads. That's a beautiful poem. I just love that. So yeah, two good things from the anthology. I have a whole bunch more that I will bring you later. I wanted to share another poem that I had. I was in New York last week for commercial negotiations for Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, sorry. Habits die hard. And I ran into an old friend of mine, had a pleasure of having a dinner with a friend of mine, Lisa, and a new friend, Laurie. And I love Lisa because Lisa teaches and loves poetry. Oh, I'll tell you, two poets getting together and just sharing their favorite poems. There's hardly anything more delicious than a feast of language and a feast of food at the same time. And she shared with me one of her current favorites, a poem called Summons, and it's by Robert Francis. And I wanted to read it to you because that's what I'm here doing, right? Summons. Keep me from going to sleep too soon, or if I go to sleep too soon, come wake me up. Come any hour of night, come whistling up the road, stomp on the porch, bang on the door. Make me get out of bed and come and let you in and light a light. Tell me the northern lights are on and make me look. Or tell me clouds are doing something to the moon they never did before and show me. See that I see. Talk to me till I'm half as wide awake as you and start to dress, wondering why I ever went to bed at all. Tell me the walking is superb. Not only tell me, but persuade me. You know I am not too hard persuaded. That's friendship. That's friendship. And that's kind of what I hope we're doing with poetry for anybody that has not picked up poetry in a while. I hope you are persuaded. Two more poems, and I'll let you go for the night. One more by Pattiann Rogers, and then I will end with one of my favorite poems, the poem I shared with Lisa. After the question of affection, I'm going to come back to poetry and me touching you through the air, right in your ear. Seduced by Ear Alone is the name of the poem. Someone should explain how it happens, starting with the dull stimulation of anvil and stirrups, the established frequency of shifting air molecules initiated by your voice entering my ear. The mind, having learned how, can find the single silk strand of your breath anywhere, latch on, and remember. But not actually touching the body at all, how do words alone ease the strictures of the palms, alter the tendency of the thighs, cause the eyes to experience visions? I can see clearly the stark white sliver of passion running a mile deep in your whisper. Maybe the ease of your voice suggests the bliss of some previous state. Sleeping in a deep crevice at the top of a mountain, the eyes sealed tight or being fed by motion in warm water at the edge of the sea. By the twist of leaves in a forest of poplars, I understand how light is fractioned and born again in the aspects of your words. I listen like an eddy in deep water turning easily from one existence to another. I want now to be covered by you. And alone on any night, if the wind in the trees should sound by accident like the timbre of your voice, I can be fooled for an instant, feeling suddenly in the dark, estimable and saved. There's a reason lovers read poetry to one another. So my favorite poem is Nonno's poem from the end of Night of the Iguana. So in 1990, I was participating in a Soviet American exchange program for young actors. And in fact, I just had the opportunity to sit down with Karen Leeds, who was one of my fellow students there. I ran into her and didn't run into her, I planned it. I found her in New York. We sat down and we lived through some old memories. But while we were in Connecticut at the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, one of the directors that was working with us that summer, Rod Marriott, was teaching us about text. And he selected that poem to read to us. And when he did, the entire room was struck with awe. Not that it was a grand performance. I think it was exactly the opposite. There was, I don't think I'd ever heard a more sincere, more vulnerable, more heartfelt delivery of a piece of text in my life. And I don't think I've experienced it since. And I'll share the poem with you, and then I'll explain. All right? It goes this. How calmly does the orange branch observe the sky begin to blanch without a cry, without a prayer, with no betrayal of despair. Some time, while night obscures the tree, the zenith of its life will be gone, past forever, and from thence a second history will commence. A chronicle no longer gold, a bargaining with mist and mold, and finally the broken stem, the plummeting to earth, and then an intercourse not well designed for beings of a golden kind, whose native green must arch above the earth's obscene, corrupting love. Yet still, the ripe fruit and the branch observe the sky, begin to blanch without a cry, without a prayer, with no betrayal of despair. O courage, could you not as well select a second place to dwell, not only in that golden tree, but in the frightened heart of me? Aging, dying, the desire for life to continue, yet to be met with the fate that befalls all of us. We worked with Rod and the staff there for another week after he read that poem. And then the Americans flew into Moscow for a couple of days in Moscow, and then we took the train to St. Petersburg. Rod came with us. And then Rod flew from Moscow to Calcutta, where he was directing a show there. And when he got there, after a few days, he cut his leg, and that injury went septic, and he died. But what Rod knew when he was reading that poem to us was that AIDS was ravaging his body. Ravaging his body. And that he wasn't sure how much longer he would live. The intersection of self with the written word. If you read enough poetry, you will find something that speaks with a voice that is as close to your own as it could be. And that's when magic happens. Same thing too with acting. Anyway, have a good night. Thanks for letting me indulge this with you. I hope that you got something out of it. And I hope that if you like it, you'll let me know and we can do it again sometime. All right? The world is full of chaos, especially right now. And these are the kinds of people that they want to hush. And we can't let them. Reading, writing, and writing in a way that resonates with our humanity is an act of defiance. Commit it regularly.